Good morning, everybody. This is the TSMU fan here, and we're going to be doing something a little different today. If you've been subscribed to the channel for a long time, you'll know that I did a 1,000 subscriber special talking about what I thought were my personal top 10 favorite episodes of Thomas and Friends. Well, today, we're going to be doing that video again, but instead, we'll be talking about the complete opposite. Thomas the Tank Engine is a show with many great gems of episodes, such as The Flying Kipper, Escape, The Grandpuff Two-Parter, and many others. Even the CGI series had great episodes scattered throughout it, like Henry's Hero, Toad's Bright Idea, Diesel's Ghostly Christmas, Useful Railway, the list goes on. But with so many good episodes throughout the show's run to talk about, there's also many very bad ones throughout the show's run. I'm going to tell you my personal list of my least favorite Thomas episodes of the whole series. And I just want to clarify that these ones are episodes that not only I think are awful, but many other people think are awful as well. Now you might be wondering, oh, what's the point of this video then? Everybody knows what the worst episodes of Thomas are. But the thing is that I want to describe and go into detail on why these episodes are just so horrifically bad, why they didn't work, and cover every single thing wrong with them. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. Here are my top 5 worst Thomas episodes. Number 5. The Lion of Sodor. Starting this off strong with a Miller-era Nitrogen episode. This episode is absolutely baffling to me. The plot of this one is that Thomas has to collect a so-called special from Brendam Docks, and Cranky tells him that the special is the Lion of Sodor. Thomas, however, mistakes the Lion of Sodor as a real lion, and doesn't listen to Henry, Edward, and Toby telling him to stop. He puts sticky syrup, fresh fish, and soft straw in the lion's crate. When he arrives at Knapford Station, he discovers his mistake and realizes that the Lion of Sodor was only a statue. Thomas has to put everything right and listens to Henry's advice to take the lion to the washdown to clean it. He listens to Edward's advice to take it to the steamworks to polish it, and he listens to Toby's advice to take a shortcut to get back to Knapford in time before the mayor arrives. The episode ends with Sir Topham Hatt making a corny joke and everyone laughing at it. This episode is just stupid. First of all, it starts with that intro that we've all heard a million times before in the hit era, just talking about how beautiful of a day it is on Sodor and just padding out the runtime with pointless filler. It's also one of the many hit era episodes where Thomas has to deliver a quote-unquote special and messes it up. He's done it so many times in previous episodes at this point that if I were Sir Topham Hatt, I wouldn't trust him to take specials since he obviously cannot handle them with care. And why is Thomas just carrying the lion around on a single flatbed with no brake van at the end? What kind of railway operates like this? If Thomas got into a runaway and his brakes failed, he wouldn't have any additional assistance to help him slow down, as that's what brake vans are used for. Additionally, this entire episode could have been prevented if Thomas had the audacity to actually listen to what his friends were saying instead of just being completely oblivious to them. Can you really call them your friends, Thomas, if you aren't willing to listen to what they have to say? Speaking of his friends, what is up with their deliveries? Why is Henry delivering syrup? And again, one flatbed of it without a brake van. Why is Edward also carrying just a singular flatbed of fish? Where are these engines going with these deliveries? Fish and hay I can kind of understand. Edward might have been taking the fish to the market or something, and Toby might have been delivering hay bales to a barn or whatever. But where in the world would Henry deliver syrup to? Also, why would Thomas think that syrup, of all things, is something that a lion would like? The hay and the fish I can understand, but syrup? Really, Thomas? Plus, Thomas's driver opens the box to pour all of these things into the crate that the lion is being transported in, which means that he knows that the lion isn't a real lion. If that's the case, what's stopping him from looking in there and being like, Thomas, I hate to break it to you, but this isn't a real lion. Is he really that stupid to just throw all of this stuff in there without looking? Additionally, the moral of listening to others is really hammered on the head here. The narrator says this 3 times total in the last half of this episode, and I'm just sitting here like,
I know! You know, I got it. I got the concept.
whatever happened to the subtlety of the earlier years, where the morals were cleverly worked into the story and weren't blatantly forced in your face? I also want to point out that some of the deliveries from some of the voice actors feel so forced instead of feeling like the natural flow of a conversation. Like, what is up with some of these deliveries?
What a good idea!
Overall, this episode is pretty horrendous. The moral is forced, the plot is just the same old, Thomas and his driver are both absolute buffoons in this, and the realism of the world is just not here in this episode. This is a pretty egregious one to start off on, but oh boy, I just know that as this list goes on, the episodes are only going to get worse and worse from here on out. Speaking of, number 4. Edward strikes out. Let's just get the obvious out of the way right up front. Edward is severely out of character in this episode. In the classic series, Edward is depicted as this wise old mentor figure and someone that all the other engines look up to and take advice from. But for some reason, this episode portrays him as a group thinker or something, and he agrees with Gordon's remark about Rocky.
That crane might be big, Gordon sniffed, but he has no engine. He can't move unless another engine pulls him.
What did Gordon even mean by this? Of course a breakdown train can't move unless an engine pulls it. It's a piece of rolling stock. It's not supposed to move by itself. Gordon's insult doesn't even really make sense when you think about it for more than a few seconds. Why does he even call Rocky a newfangled nonsense if his very strange view of a breakdown train is for it to have its own engine to pull it? Since Rocky doesn't have that, why didn't Gordon just call him outdated or something like that? It's just really, really confusing. And then of course we have the scene where Edward collects his train of pipes and is rude to Rocky himself, calling him a newfangled nonsense just like Gordon did. What is your problem, Edward? Rocky's just offering to help. He's not hurting anybody. This is so wrong for Edward to be needlessly rude to someone and reject their help. If anything, this episode would have worked much better if James was the main character instead of Edward. In fact, I made an edit of this a really long time ago on my Twitter page that you can go and check out if you want to. But anyways, another issue I see is why did Rocky even offer to come with Edward in the first place? What was he going to even do? Unload the pipes when Edward got to his destination? Wouldn't there already be another crane on hand for that since Rocky is at the docks and has just arrived? And as much as I hate to bring this up, Edward was kind of in the right for denying Rocky's help. Rocky is a huge crane, and that extra weight Edward would have to pull would have made taking his delivery even harder. I just feel like Edward could have been much more polite about it instead of just being completely impolite to Rocky. Edward then leaves the docks before his load can be properly secured and tries to stop suddenly at a signal, which causes his pipes to fall into the track. He thinks about what he should do now, and remembers that Thomas said that Rocky was very strong, but he still refuses to get help from him and asks his driver to telephone for Harvey to come instead. Are you stupid or something, Edward? You remember Thomas saying that Rocky was a very strong crane, but yet you didn't make the connection that getting Rocky to clear the mess was the most logical situation. Harvey then tries to clear the tracks, but can only lift one pipe up at a time. While he's doing this, Thomas and Emily arrive doubleheading a train and need to get through. Thomas suggests to Edward to get Rocky to help, but Edward says that Harvey is doing a fine job. Apparently Edward must be getting so old that he's going deaf, because he clearly didn't hear Harvey say that it was going to take him a very long time to clear the mess. Emily then says that she doesn't like being patient, and this next issue is one that I only noticed on this latest rewatch. This is totally inconsistent with another episode. Remember that one episode from season 8 called As Good as Gordon? The one where Emily learns to be patient while pulling the express for Gordon? Yeah, this episode completely contradicts that one. And these episodes are from the same era and are 2 seasons apart. Come on, you couldn't even be bothered to have Emily be consistent with what you established in a previous episode? Man, they really didn't care in this era, did they? Gordon then races through on the middle line and crashes into the pipes, derailing. Okay, so a little fun fact about me. I never watched this episode as a kid, but I do remember watching the Fun Times with Our Friends segment on Edward, which featured clips from this episode in it. Back then, I was scared of Gordon's surprise face because a really long time ago, I had watched the Michael Brandon dub of Gordon Takes a Tumble as the first Thomas episode I had ever watched. When they showed the close-ups of Gordon's surprised and eyes shut faces along with the extra added groans and sounds that Brandon ad-libbed in, I ended up becoming scared to death of those faces, and I couldn't watch any episode that had those faces in them for a very long time. So when this segment showed Gordon's crash in this episode, I immediately ran off and hid in my room because I knew what was coming. I'm of course not afraid of those faces anymore, and I just think of it as a funny memory from childhood now. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. If those pipes weren't there and Gordon had kept going, he would have run right into Harvey. You can see that both of them are on the same track in the aftermath shot of the crash. Was there really no signalman alerted that there was an accident on the main line? Also, why did Gordon just come rushing in on that middle line pulling absolutely nothing? Where was he even going? They couldn't have given him an express freight train to pull or something? And I say freight train because if Gordon had been pulling passengers in that instance, I highly doubt that they could have gotten away with saying luckily no one was hurt like they normally do in the hit era. Anyway, it's only after Thomas tells Edward to go get Rocky and we get that third strike that Edward realizes that he messed up and goes and gets Rocky from the docks. Man, they really weren't kidding when they named this episode Edward Strikes Out, considering the 3 strikes formula is present in this episode. Also, there's something very lazy that they did here in this episode when Edward goes and gets Rocky and brings him to the rescue that I want to bring up. The narrator tells us that Edward pulled Rocky up hills and down valleys, and we see tilted camera angles of Edward traveling with Rocky to make the sets look steep. They couldn't have bothered to film Edward pulling Rocky up Gordon's Hill or through Shen Valley or something like that? Come on, just tilting the camera to make the sets look hilly is the laziest thing you could do here. Edward brings Rocky to the crash site, he lifts Gordon back onto the tracks, and clears the pipes off the rails. Why did Rocky leave them besides the tracks though? Edward still has to deliver those, why'd you set them next to the track? Edward admits that he was silly to think that Rocky was a newfangled nonsense, and admits that Rocky is really useful. I'm sorry? Shouldn't Gordon be the one apologizing here? He was the one who put that idea in Edward's head in the first place and caused him to be rude to Rocky for no reason. This episode should have ended with both of them apologizing. Gordon apologizing for being wrong about Rocky being a newfangled nonsense. But no, it ends with Edward being the only one to apologize, and the fact that there is no Gordon apology here almost makes it feel like he didn't really learn anything. Overall, if I were to describe this episode in a single word, it would be disappointing. They used the completely wrong character as the lead for this episode, resulting in one of the most out of character moments ever in the show. The characters, specifically Gordon and Edward, are written as if they're brain dead stupid. It's not consistent with other episodes. The filming feels very lazy in parts. The moral is forced, and there's not even an apology from the character who started the entire conflict to begin with. It is, without a doubt, the worst Edward episode in the entire series in my opinion. Number 3. Fiery Flynn. At least the title of this episode is accurate. It is a literal dumpster fire. The plot of this one is that Flynn the fire engine is criticized by Diesel for never being busy, with Flynn retorting that he is waiting to be busy. The rescue bell rings, and Rocky is about to tell Flynn about a blue engine who's in trouble, but Flynn races away before Rocky can tell him which blue engine is in trouble. Flynn ends up finding Edward and soaking his driver in water, finding Gordon and soaking Sir Topham Hatt in water, and finally coming across Thomas, the blue engine who was in trouble the whole time. Flynn can't save him, however, as he used up all his water to save the other engines he came across. He enlists the help of the Diesels, and they end up putting out Thomas's fire. Later, Flynn arrives back at the rescue center and learns to listen for which engine is in trouble so that he can rescue them, which he does. Again, this episode has the same boring filler at the beginning that tells us what a beautiful day it is on Sodor, just like the Lion of Sodor. The scene afterwards that introduces us us to Flynn has way too much alliteration going on here. My gosh, there's so many F words. If this keeps up, I might have to say an F word of my own. Also, there's a goof here that's similar to one that I mentioned in my King of the Railway review video. Flynn leaves Nafford Station through its bay platform, meaning that the tracks dead end at the wall. You're not going to the search and rescue center, Flynn. I'd say you're going to crash. Also, why is Diesel telling Flynn, of all characters, that he's never busy, considering that 2 fires happen in this episode that Flynn has to respond to? I mean, almost immediately after this line is said, there's another emergency for Flynn to take care of. And Diesel said he's never busy? Of course he is, considering that he's one of Sodor's main firefighting fleet. Additionally, I think it's kind of Rocky's fault here for not just saying it was Thomas who needed to be rescued at first, considering how he delivered his line. He says, "There's a blue engine!" and intentionally didn't elaborate on which blue engine it was right off the bat so that the plot can happen. It's even more obvious that this is the case later in the episode, where he says right away that Mavis is in trouble at the quarry. The writing here is abysmal, with it intentionally setting Flynn up for failure, and as a result, you know exactly what's going to happen and what the moral is going to be. That's the case with a lot of these Hit Era episodes. They all feel so predictable. Also, when Flynn goes to rescue Edward and Gordon, he asks them afterwards,
"You're not on fire?"
And all I have to say is this: does it look like Edward and Gordon are on fire, Flynn? This guy is a firefighter. He's fought probably dozens of fires before this. And we even see him fight one in his flashback, which means that he knows what a fire looks like, with smoke billowing everywhere and feeling the heat of the fire if it's intense enough. Edward and Gordon are not in a situation where smoke is billowing out of them. And no, the steam that they emit when idle doesn't count. Are you blind, Flynn? Do you really not have the brain power to deduce that they're not on fire, considering that all of the conditions needed for you to recognize a fire are not present? He absolutely deserved Den and Dart laughing at him. This is just completely idiotic. Also, he totally soaked Sir Topham Hatt and he didn't get in trouble for that? If I were Sir Topham Hatt, I would have been furious, considering that now he doesn't look presentable to go wherever Gordon was taking him, Lady Hat, and Dowager Hat to. Additionally, why does Gordon refer to himself in the third person here after Flynn explains to Sir Topham Hatt that he was saving Gordon?
Gordon doesn't need saving!
I feel like that should have been Topham's line, not Gordon's. Just hearing Gordon refer to himself in the third person sounds so weird. Who talks like that? Also, another issue that I want to bring up in this episode is the annoying rhyming dialogue. Many Hit Era episodes use this trope, and it's absolutely atrocious. At least in the Lion of Sodor's case, it only happened once towards the end of the episode, so I'll give that episode that. But in Fiery Flynn, the rhyming dialogue is much more noticeable. Rhyming dialogue, of course, isn't a new thing in Thomas. See the first few lines of The Sad Story of Henry, for example, and it's used at its best when it only happens occasionally. This episode, however, is filled to the brim with rhymes. You want to know how many times it rhymes in this episode alone? 7. 7 total times. That's almost 10 times in a single episode, and that's way too much. Also, this is the infamous episode where the narrator says that Thomas's firebox was on fire. And if you remember, I mentioned this briefly in my Day of the Diesels review video. Well, now you're going to hear my full thoughts on just what I think of this. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's called a firebox for a reason. It's supposed to be on fire so that the fire can boil the water in the boiler and turn it into steam to propel the engine forward. And fireboxes are intentionally designed in such a way that the fire can't spread to other parts of the engine. So how in the world did the fire in Thomas's firebox somehow manage to get out of control? Also, in the cab shot of Thomas when they showed the Diesels as drivers pouring water on Thomas's fire in his firebox to put it out, you can clearly see that the lever to close the firebox doors is right there on the floor in front of the firebox. If Thomas's fire were to somehow somehow get out of control, why didn't his firemen just close the firebox doors to control the fire that way? This unrealistic situation could have been prevented if Thomas's fireman was actually doing his job. The writers here clearly did not do any research on how steam engines work, and thus it resulted in one of the worst and dumbest moments in the entire nitrogen era. Additionally, I also think that's pretty convenient that Flynn just so happened to run out of water when he needed to save the engine that he was looking for the whole time. Was his water tank really that empty that he only had enough for those 2 blasts that we see in the episode? Also, what is up with Diesel here?
Yeah.
What the heck was that? Why did he say yeah like that? That's just weird, man. And just like the Lion of Sodor, the moral of listening is again shoved down your throat at the end and isn't subtle at all. And actually, now that I think about it, this episode and the Lion of Sodor literally have the same moral. Were they really that lazy to repeat the same moral that they had already covered a few seasons ago? The answer is obviously yes. In conclusion, this episode is a real stinker. The moral is again forced at the end. The rhyming and alliteration is absolutely over the top. The writing is very poor, as is the case for all of the nitrogen episodes. The plot is predictable, the characters are again portrayed as idiots, and the scenarios are totally unrealistic. The only thing I can really say to finish off and summarize this episode is the same thing that Den said.
Fiery Flynn fudges it.
I couldn't have put it better myself. Number 2. Up, Up, and Away. This episode is definitely one of the most infamous episodes of the entire Nitrogen era, as it's one that a lot of people regard as being one of the worst episodes from this era. The plot of this one is that Thomas and Percy are assigned to take a giant balloon on a flatbed to Mr. Bubbles' balloon show, but Thomas doesn't want to make Percy upset by not doing what he wants. So Thomas ends up listening to Percy and they take the coastal track and lose their balloon to the wind. They get another balloon, and Percy says that they should go through a tunnel that they come across on their way to the show that the big balloon is obviously too big for. They end up getting yet another balloon and end up deflating it after stopping too suddenly when Gordon passes by them with the express. So Topham Hatt is on Gordon's train along with Lady Hat and Dowager Hat, and he is very upset with Thomas and Percy after the balloon knocks all of their hats off. Thomas realizes that he messed up, as he knew exactly what to do but didn't do it in order for Percy to not be upset. He realizes that he can't make Percy upset, as Percy is his best friend. Later, they end up clearing the track that the balloon was stuck on, and they get one last big balloon to take to the show, which they finally do successfully. The episode ends with the balloon that got carried away by the wind somehow floating back towards the balloon show, and Thomas and Percy remarking on how the wind did bring it back to them, and even Gordon is impressed that that happened. First off, this episode of course features the surface level trope of always having Thomas and Percy just be friends and nothing more, which I brought up in both my Misty Island Rescue review video and my Day of the Diesels review video. It makes their relationship feel very two-dimensional when they always resort to just the lazy one-note shtick all the time. Like, I get it, Thomas and Percy are friends with each other. You don't have to shove it in my face. Also, why are they transporting the big balloon with it tied down on a flatbed? Why don't they just take Mr. Bubbles to the balloon show and he can blow up the balloons there? Why is Mr. Bubbles still at the docks when Thomas and Percy come back for another balloon? He should be at the balloon show already, not blowing up balloons for Thomas and Percy so that they can transport them. The logic in this episode makes absolutely no sense at all. Additionally, Thomas and Percy, much like Flynn and Fiery Flynn, are portrayed as absolute buffoons in this episode. I'm on Gordon's side here. There is absolutely no way that the balloon will somehow magically float back down onto Thomas and Percy's flatbed so that they can continue with their delivery. It of course doesn't do that in the episode, but the fact that both of them believe that it would is absolutely appalling to me. Also, did they really think that they could get the balloon through a tunnel that is very clearly too small for it? Again, I'm on Gordon's side here. All the pressure applied to the top of the balloon is going to cause it to pop. The fact that they, again, believe that they could do such an outlandish thing is incredibly stupid on both of their parts. What's more, why did they just randomly stop on the main line when Gordon passes them towards the end? Why does Gordon also stop next to them? He's taking the Hat family to the balloon show. If he stops, he's going to make them late. And yet again, the moral is forced at the end of this episode, very clearly stating that just because your friend wants to do something that you feel might not be the right thing to do, doesn't mean that you should go along with what they want to do just to make them happy. Also, Thomas says that he didn't want Percy to be upset, and now he is. And after Thomas says that he knew what to do but didn't do it, Percy chimes in with,
"Why didn't you, Thomas?"
Meaning that he was listening in on what Thomas was saying and already heard him say that he didn't want to make him upset, but Thomas repeats it again anyways. Oh my gosh, Percy, are you deaf or something? And then Percy says,
"You can't upset me, Thomas. You're my best friend."
I don't know about you guys, but he seemed pretty upset in those previous scenes when what he was planning to do didn't work out the way he had hoped it would. And why? Just why did they leave the balloon that they had stuck in the tunnel just sitting there blocking the track? We already saw Gordon trying to get through the tunnel when Thomas and Percy first got stuck. So what if another engine comes along that line and finds the balloon just sitting there stuck in the tunnel? The only thing that I can really give this episode credit for is the humor with Mr. Bubbles. Seeing him huffing and puffing out of breath after blowing up the balloons for Thomas and Percy is hilarious and is definitely the best part of this episode, which isn't saying a lot considering that it's overpowered by all the bad stuff that this one has to offer. The surface level trope of always having Thomas and Percy be friends is forced in and is the main focus of this episode. The logic is absolutely unreasonable. The characters are yet again portrayed as absolute morons. The moral is yet again forced, and the realism is, again, absolutely thrown out the window here. I definitely want to go up, up, and away from this episode, that's for sure. There are a lot of bad episodes in Thomas. The classic series had some episodes that didn't really work out, such as the Old Bridge and Middle Engine as examples. The Hit model era had some really bad ones as well, like Thomas's Frosty Friend, Skarloey the Brave, Saving Edward, Chickens to School, the list goes on. When it came to the Nitrogen era, the quality got even worse. Episodes like Henry's Health and Safety, Thomas and the Runaway Kite, Henry's Happy Coal, and Ho Ho Snowman are all incredibly bad as well. And those are only just a couple examples from each season that I did not mention in this video. I could go on and on about Nitrogen era episodes that suck. But anyways, even the Andrew Brenner era got some stuff wrong, like in episodes such as Henry Spots Trouble, Diesel and the Ducklings, Steamy Stafford, Flatbeds of Fear, etc, etc. And oh my gosh, the Bwubba era was even worse. None of those episodes have made it onto this list because I do not want to talk about those and get an aneurysm from all of the wacky and outlandish bullcrap that happens in those episodes. Anyways, my point is that there are bad episodes scattered throughout all of Thomas's run. Even the best seasons had their moments that people didn't really care for. But out of all of these episodes, which one is the worst one? Which episode is the worst episode of the entire show? Well, I'll tell you. The worst episode of the entire show is, in my opinion, number 1, Wonky Whistle. This is, without a doubt, my least favorite episode of the entire show. Nothing else competes with this. I said in my Bwubba review when I mentioned that Thomas's whistle fluctuates in pitch when he rescues Nia that we don't talk about Wonky Whistle, and there's a reason for it. This episode absolutely sucks. So today, I'm going to do what I said that we shouldn't do in the Bwubba review, and talk about just why this episode is such a bad one in my opinion. Here we go. The plot of Wonky Whistle is that Thomas is getting his whistle fixed at the Steamworks and leaves to do his special job assigned to him by Sir Topham Hatt before his whistle is properly fixed into place. As a result, his whistle doesn't sound normal at all, which scares Farmer McCall's sheepdog Katie, the ducks, and Farmer McCall's prize cow all away when he whistles to tell everyone about the country show happening on Sodor. Thomas only realizes that he lost all the animals when he arrives at the country show and Farmer McCall asks him where his animals are. He then whistles and only realizes after seeing Farmer McCall chase after a sheep, which were startled by Thomas's whistle, that his whistle is what caused the animals to run away. He goes to get his whistle fixed, gets all the animals back, takes them to the country show, and then goes around telling everyone about the country show using his proper whistle. The episode ends with Sir Topham Hatt telling Thomas to use his whistle to declare the country show open, with everyone cheering as Thomas whistles happily. This episode stinks. First of all, this episode, like the Lion of Sodor and Fiery Flynn, has pointless filler at the beginning that just says what a beautiful day it is on Sodor and how hard all the engines are working to prepare for the country show. We get it! The engines are busy! Just start the episode already! Also, when Thomas is getting his whistle fixed, right before he leaves, he says,
I'm sure my whistle isn't wonky.
"Are you serious, Thomas? Can you not feel that your whistle is out of place? He's a sentient steam engine. He should be able to feel something like that." I mean, Peter Sam clearly felt that his funnel was wobbly in special funnel, so if these engines can feel something like their funnel being out of place, they should also be able to feel their whistle being out of place as well. Also, when Thomas leaves without making sure his whistle is secure, he nearly knocks a workman off the ladder he's standing on to fit Thomas's whistle into place. Jeez, Thomas, your impatience nearly caused someone to be badly hurt. Additionally, there's a goof here as Thomas leaves the steamworks. If you look closely, you can see that Thomas's wheels are turning much slower than the speed that Thomas is going at. So not only was the episode not written well, it apparently wasn't animated well either. Also, when Thomas arrives at the farm to collect the animals, he's again transporting them in a singular LNER 12-ton van with no brake van at the end. Where is the railway realism here? Also, was Thomas really stupid enough to assume that all the people who were waving at him to tell him that he had lost his animals were waving to say hello? I mean, I guess this isn't new. A similar situation happened in Thomas's train, but that was before he had become an experienced engine and learned how to pull coaches. In this scenario, shouldn't he know that something is off when the people wave at him and tell him to stop? He definitely should have, considering that he sees Farmer McCall shout and wave at him later after his whistle scares the sheep away at the country show. Come on, Thomas, you're smarter than this. And again, the rhyming dialogue and the alliteration is abysmally bad in this episode. I again counted how many times it rhymed, and I counted a total of 6 times. One rhyme less than Fiery Flynn. But still, 6 is way too much. Come on, Thomas is not Dr. Seuss. Also, right after Thomas goes under the bridge, there's another goof here. If you look closely at Thomas's whistle in this tracking shot, you'll notice that it suddenly isn't wonky anymore. Additionally, in the scene after this tracking shot, you'll notice that again, the whistle is completely normal. This one's a little harder to spot, as the full whistle only shows up for about a split second before Thomas leaves the screen. This goof is so funny to me. They were apparently so lazy with consistency that they didn't even bother to have Thomas's whistle be wonky in these shots. Also, when Thomas stops at Maithwaite, was he really not paying enough attention to see Farmer McCall's prize cow trot right past him in his field of vision? Come to think of it, did Thomas even hear Katie barking, the ducks quacking, and the cow mooing when they all escaped from the van he was pulling? Come on, Thomas, those should have been clues to you that they had gotten out of your van and were scared of your wonky whistle. And once more, the moral of being patient and waiting until everything is ready is again forced in at the end of this episode. And the worst part about it is this is something that Thomas has already learned in the past. I mentioned Thomas's train earlier. Yeah, he learns to be patient and wait until everything is ready in that episode. And that is the 5th episode of the entire show. You really couldn't think of any other morals to have? You just had to use the most surface level one that you could think of when writing this episode, and it being a moral that's already been covered several times in the series? All of these criticisms I have with this episode are why I think it is the worst episode of the entire show. The beginning is long and drawn out, as we've come to expect by now. Thomas is portrayed as if he is completely and utterly brain dead, not caring about people's safety and being more focused on delivering the animals to the country show. The animation is pretty poor here and doesn't bother to be consistent with the rest of the episode in parts. The railway realism is again completely absent here. The scenarios are completely illogical, the rhyming dialogue is annoying, and the moral is, you guessed it, forced at the end of the episode, and is one that Thomas has already learned countless times before in the past. This episode is pretty much a combination of every single thing that the Nitrogen era did wrong, and that's why I hate it so much. It is easily the worst episode of the entire show in my opinion, and no other will ever come close to it. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I could rant on and on about bad episodes in the show all day, but I think I'll end it there before I get too angry. What are your guys' least favorite episodes of the show? Go ahead and feel free to share yours in the comments, and maybe, if this video does well, I'll make a follow-up talking about the worst classic series episodes. I definitely think that'll be an interesting video topic, going in detail about the worst classic series episodes and why they don't work. It's definitely a video that's going to have to wait for another day though, as we've reached the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one. This is the TSMU fan, signing out. Special thanks to my Patreon supporter, Master Painter, and I give an extra special thanks to those patrons of mine who have chosen to remain anonymous. If you'd like to learn how to get your name at the end of every new video that I upload, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Link is on my channel homepage under my channel description.